Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to paranormal researcher and TV presenter Jayne Harris. How are you, Jane?
Hi, David. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm coping with the lockdown. Are you doing the same?
Yes, yeah. We've lockdown's not turned into meltdown just yet.
Yeah.
We're juggling the homeschooling and the working from home. Myself and my husband quite well actually so far. I think it's about 6 weeks in now, isn't it? So yes,
Yeah.
I've killed no one yet.
No, not yet. So I went out for a little bit of walk before, and yeah, no, it's any day now. I think for walking down the streets of London, there might be a death or two. Now, you've I can't imagine you'd be a person that would get bored because you've got quite a lot of projects on. You've always seems to be having another thing, whether it's Afterlife or any of the television shows you've worked on, or even your books and the courses. What are you doing to keep yourself busy at the moment?
At the moment, I think, like lots of people, it's the world's gone virtual, hasn't it? We're all online. So, yeah, the majority of the stuff I'm doing now, apart from, as you mentioned, Afterlife, I'm doing a lot of editing, which is good, something that I didn't get a chance to do before lockdown. So, in that respect, it's done me a favour. But when I'm not doing that, I'm doing streaming, I do podcast and online courses, really. So, just trying to stay connected to everyone in the only way we all can now, really, in the World Wide Web.
That's right. Well, education seems to be quite important to you. You've already done a psychology degree, and now you're doing history, and you do your courses online. What do you think? Do you feel that paranormal investigators should continue to get educated?
I think it's a very personal thing, and I've always actually had it's kind of a pet peeve of mine, really, these small pockets within, I'll say, the paranormal community, because I suppose that's generally what we call ourselves. But there are small pockets of what I suppose I'd term the self-proclaimed academic elite who say a lot of big words and kind of don't really ever have the time to accept the average sort of ghost hunter, if you like, their approach. And I've always felt that, the paranormal doesn't have to be like that. It's accessible to everyone and anyone. I did do a psychology degree, as you say, and I worked for some time in adult mental health. And I do still have an interest in psychology, and in particular the psychology of paranormal experiences. But I don't think that you have to have a degree or, a PhD or anything at all like that to know what you're talking about. Because by its very nature, what we're dealing with is anomalous, it's
Yeah,
unexplained. So
yeah.
you can only ever really know so much. There are no kind of experts, although, TV shows and different things will kind of pitch people as an expert in a particular subject. We're all just learning, we're all continuously learning. And I've always felt very strongly about that. I've got friends who have been very interested in the paranormal for years, but always felt kind of a little bit on the sidelines, not really very comfortable approaching the larger organisations, the older, more established organisations, because
Yeah.
they don't come from this academic background. And it's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, some of those older organisations, which are great, but you look at the stuff when you like some of the talks they put on, they'd be well over my head. I mean, I wouldn't understand a word they were talking about, and that's not because I'm stupid. It's just because they really do go deeply into the physics of the. And there's obviously a place for that, but uh, there is also a place for feeling and for just getting a feel for a place, isn't it? You understand if something's not quite right. Sort of one of the things I've noticed in your writing, you talk about the difference between ghost hunting and paranormal investigations. Can you maybe explain what you mean by that, ghost hunting versus paranormal investigations?
I think for me, an investigation isn't a single event. So when you're conducting a paranormal investigation, it's a series of experiments, really, of trials, of processes, before you can really call something a paranormal investigation. Going on a ghost hunt, it is more of not entertainment, but you can have fun with it. You don't have to be the most well-read person in the world. You don't have to have the most expensive kit. You can go out and you can go with a group of like-minded people on a ghost hunt. And I think we all kind of understand what that means. Events companies run ghost hunts. I run them myself, a few a year for the public. And they're good fun, and it's a good way to open the door for some people to this world. But a paranormal investigation is something that has to be very carefully planned and considered. Some of my favourite places to investigate are people's homes, and I would never call that a ghost hunt. I would never go into someone's home and claim that I'm now going to hunt ghosts. I've not really got a problem with the term. I think some people are very sort of choosy. They don't want to be labelled as a ghost hunter. I don't really think it matters. I can understand, you're not hunting ghosts, but
Well, it was good enough. It was good enough for Harry Price. I mean, Steve Parsons always says that. Good enough for Harry Price. He called himself a ghost hunter. Who do we to argue?
He did, yes. And, I admire Harry Price very much. When I was younger, when I, got into all of this, I read everything I could, Peter Underwood and Arthur C. Clarke and Harry Price, and that was kind of really what got me interested. However, over the years, of course, lots of there are big question marks over some of Harry Price's investigations, but we weren't there. Who's to know?
Yeah.
But yes, ghost hunter, fine. It's just one of those terms that people understand, isn't it? But I think, coming back to your point about paranormal investigations, I think it would be highly irresponsible, really, for someone to go out there and go to someone's home and claim that they're about to conduct a paranormal investigation without some prior background research, knowledge, education, experience. So I think that's the difference for me. And when I do a talk on the subject, I try to kind of clarify for people, what you see on TV, you may well classify as a ghost hunt. What you do over a prolonged period of time is more a paranormal investigation.
We were talking to Ashley Nibb a couple of weeks ago, and he's been investigating the same pub for the last 10 years. I mean, that's an investigation, isn't it? When you've been able to compare, over a decade. But people going in for something like 3 hours or 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday night's maybe not going to find as much information, are they?
Well, no. I mean, you can investigate in that time, but I think that there is a difference between an investigation and going somewhere and spending a bit of time investigating. But I can understand the kind of grey area there in between the two.
Yeah. So we were talking before, when you were younger. How did you get into the paranormal? It's a story, your origin story.
Where it all started, the grassroots. To be honest with you, I can't remember a time when the idea of life after death wasn't there. Growing up, my parents both not spiritualists, but they used to visit spiritualist churches quite regularly with my grandparents. My mum's side's Roman Catholic and my father's side C of E. So my nan on my father's side was very anti-spiritualism. So I kind of grew up with these two perspectives on the whole life after death thing. Although, there is a belief that there is something greater coming from both sides. It was two very different approaches. But I grew up listening to my parents talk about their experiences, apparitions that they both seen over the years, dream visitations that especially my dad had had of his own father coming to him. So it was kind of just always there in the background, really. I'd be playing with toys or whatever and just overhear these conversations. And then I got to about 16 and became really interested, just in the idea of, well, where do we go next? I think most teenagers, you go through that phase of the fear of death and the fear of your loved ones dying, and kind of I came out of the other side of that with lots of questions. And then when I was 17, my cousin, who was 16 at the time, she died in a car accident, and so suddenly it went from being a curiosity to being more of a need to really kind of understand if there is something else. So that was it, really. I started reading everything I could and doing as much research as I could. But of course, you didn't just go on the internet back then. It was libraries, old school. And that was it, really. And then I think it was through visiting the spiritualist churches with my parents that I started having conversations with people about my interests. And then I think in 1998, I was called to my first home investigation. And that's how it started, really.
Okay, so how did that happen when you say you're called to your first investigation? Like, was
Well,
it through friends or was it through someone that knew you?
Yeah, we were chatting at the Spiritualist Church, actually. We'd seen a medium, and she'd given some very strong messages to a lady in the audience. And I'd always sort of been a bit on the fence, really, because a lot of the messages that come through, as you know, they can be very generic, or, with the cold reading and everything, you can just kind of tell. But this lady was absolutely spot on. I've never seen anyone like her since. She knew names and dates and just information that had this lady in tears. And so I spoke to the lady afterwards and I was really intrigued. And she said, "So are you interested in this kind of thing then? What do you do?" And at that time, of course, I was studying. I said, "Well, I'm studying psychology and I was doing sociology at the time as well." I said, "But, it is an interest of mine, definitely." And she said, told me about her friend. She said, "Oh, you should go round and see her because she's been having knocking sounds on the wall." And I thought, this is interesting. I'd just read a book about Bawley Rectory at the time. I was like, ooh. But kind of part of you, and even now, part of me is always not skeptical, but I'm not skeptical about the paranormal. I do believe in life after death, and I do believe that the world isn't as we perceive it. There's more than the material. But I'm skeptical about people's perceptions of their experiences, if that makes sense. So a lot of the time, I think that we can explain away what's happening to people. And I was the same then, when I was sort of 16, 17. So I went round to her house and I heard it for myself. And we went through all of the possible explanations. We looked at the pipe work, we looked at the electrics, detached house, couldn't be neighbours. We looked in the loft, are there birds? So we sort of tried to rule out everything. And so that was really my first investigation. I spent 3 or 4 months going back there every fortnight, and it was just fabulous. I just loved it, and I suppose got the bug really.
Okay, so how do you move from there to being on a national on the telly, basically? You've been on quite a lot now. With the bestest name of all TV shows of all time, Help My House is Haunted. I just think that's a wonderful name for a TV show. So much, all these
Just
paranormal.
what it says on the tin, doesn't it?
It is Help My House is Haunted. It's just it's. But how did you go from turning up as a young person that's looking at some hearing some knocks on the door from church, all the way to getting yourself on the telly?
The honest answer is I don't know. I joined Facebook in 2012. I think I was fairly late to the whole world of social media. And I suppose that's when I started to connect with other people who were interested in this and doing this. Up until then, really, I hadn't, because I was a young girl and it was a bit unusual. Most of the groups I knew of in the Midlands were men, in the 40s, 50s. They'd been doing it a long time. They didn't really want me cramping their style. So I couldn't really join any groups. So I was kind of out there on my own, really. So yeah, it was probably joining Facebook. And I just gradually started doing a few interviews, I suppose, radio things and the odd magazine article, and then yeah, you start to get a few unexpected phone calls, and the next thing you know, you're out filming with Chris Fleming and Barry Guy, and it's all very exciting.
And you ended, and I don't know what the proper title is, but you were named like top female paranormal investigator, I think, about 2016. What was the proper title?
Britain's foremost.
Foremost, okay. Well, that's good. That's
yeah. I mean, how they work that out, I don't know.
It doesn't matter, does it really? I mean, I'd rather you be called that than the least, wouldn't you?
Well,
So it's
yeah.
That's right. So, what have been some of your more memorable experiences? Like, compare doing an investigation by yourself or with your friend, colleagues without a camera, and when it's on TV. Because I always imagine there must be a lot of pressure on you to perform on television. Not in a bad way, but just like you've got to try to find something. How do you weigh that up? How does that work?
Well, on TV, I mean, it's very different when we do the show because it's a 45-minute show, but the investigation alone is 12 hours. So you can imagine there's a lot of filming of footage that just does nothing, goes nowhere, it gets deleted, no one ever sees it. So we spend the first day is the day that we arrive at location and we interview people. The second day, we do the 12-hour investigation overnight. And then the third day, so we spend 3 days at each place. The third day is kind of the summing up. We go through all the evidence during the day. and then we meet up. So it's a long process over 3 days to create that 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And there's stopping and starting. We need to make sure it's making sense for the viewer. You'll get sort of 10 hours through an investigation and you'll think, okay, we've got this, but does that make sense? Because sometimes during an investigation, you'll have loads of sporadic things happening, spirits and paranormal activity. It's never goes to script. It's never on cue. You can't plan what's going to happen. And so there are times I know that the producers have to make a call when they're in the edit and say, well, that's fantastic. That footage is brilliant, but it doesn't make sense in terms of the story. That we went there for a particular reason, and that's kind of off on another tangent, so it will just confuse people. So there's an element of disappointment there, because for Barry, Chris and I, we know what happens when we go to some of these places, and unfortunately sometimes the viewer never gets to see that. So in terms of that, you don't have as much control as you do when you're planning your own private investigations, and you can, when it's your own thing, you can spend as long as you want to somewhere in one spot. You can say, well, we've had a few things in this room. Let's just stay here for another hour. Let's try something different. But when you're filming, you want to explore as much as possible of a location, but in that window that you've got. So it in many ways, it's more interesting to do your own investigation, because you have the control. As I say, you generally have just a couple of people with you rather than a film crew. But they're two very different things in a way. And it's nice to be involved in a TV production like that, because you get to see very skeptical crew members suddenly experience something, and you can tell they're rattled. And for people like us who are like, "Wah, I told you so," it's brilliant. So they're just two very different things in many ways.
What would you say was the most, and I don't mind a bit television, whether it's television or it's in, I was going to say in real life, in a non-television situation, what's been the most memorable investigation you've done?
Oh. Well, actually, one of the scariest, and so this is one of my most memorable because I was genuinely afraid, was when we were filming in Nuneaton, which was, I think it broadcast as episode 8. Very ordinary.
And this is Help My House Is Haunted, you mean?
Sorry, Help My House Is Haunted, and very ordinary house. But the things that we experienced there were on a level that I hadn't experienced before in sort of 19, 20 years previously. And it's because the implication was, and it appeared, that it was something a bit darker. We arrived at this house, and Julie, the owner, had said that when she moved in 20 years before, there'd been satanic symbols painted on the walls in red paint or nail varnish, which she hadn't been able to remove, so they painted over it. And it was this particular room that was then her daughter's bedroom, bizarrely. And things had been happening in there. And when we went in, I've always been a little bit skeptical about some of these devices that you use, the Ovilus being one, because whenever I've seen one being used, it's a very much, a random word generator. It just spits random words out. And generally, people tend to only really pay attention to the ones that fit what they want to believe. But when we went into that house and walked into that bedroom, Chris put the device on the wall where the symbols were supposed to be underneath the white paint. And we had instantly, it was apocalypse, follow, 13, Satan. I just thought, how on earth is that happening? So for the first time, and then we picked something up on audio, which later Barry researched, and it was the name of a demon. And I just kind of sat there thinking, is this happening? Is this really? It just kind of spun things on its head for me a little bit. So that was one of my most memorable. However, my favourite location, it's a bit of a cheat because it encompasses a few, is Edinburgh's Old Town. Okay, because I absolutely love Mary King's Close, the vaults, Greyfriars, the entire area. I think when you're there, you can not only feel and see the history around you, but you can just feel the spirits as well. I genuinely believe that. So 2 really. Edinburgh's Old Town, and Nuneaton, two completely different places.
They sound fantastic, and hopefully one day, well, once all this lockdowns, we'll be able to go to these places again and do that. How are you coping not being able to go outside, though? You said you're doing lots of podcasts, you're talking to people, probably writing. What things are coming up that people can see you in, or contact with you, engage with you in?
We know that this year there will be a second series of Unexplained caught on camera, which was a really fun clip show that I was involved in last year. And that is something that we're able to continue production of simply because of the nature of how it's filmed. So you're not going into people's homes. It's much easier. So that will be coming up this year anyway. But in the very near future, I'm doing a few workshops. I do a workshop on near-death experiences, which is next week, and also going down a darker route, a demonology workshop on the 18th of May. I don't claim that these will qualify people as demonologists or anything like that, but they're just fun ways to learn a little bit about a slightly different subject, hopefully, for people.
Okay, well, that sounds excellent. I saw that on your thing, and I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about the demonology, because I mean, to me that seems like there's a lot more focus on the demons in America than there is here. What is your general thought? I mean, you're obviously doing a course on it, so you have some feelings about it. But what will people learn if they do the course with you?
Well, I'm quite interested, as I mentioned before, growing up in a kind of semi-religious background, especially the Roman Catholic side of things. I've always had an interest in perception around demons, the whole kind of biblical presentation of if you're good, you'll go to heaven, and you're bad, you'll go to hell. So part of the course is actually just helping people to understand the background of all of this, demonology from ancient Greece right the way through. It's not something that's been developed in recent years, and the idea that I genuinely don't believe that when you go to haunted places you will encounter a demon as often as you might be led to believe by watching certain TV shows.
Yeah.
However, I'm open to the idea that where there is light there is dark, and I think you'd probably be quite ignorant to completely dismiss the potential for something like that. So my course is very much saying, it's not saying demons are real and come along and I'll tell you about them and I'll tell you how to get rid of them. It's not that kind of course. It's more a course about the background to demonology, what people believe happens during demonic possessions, the rites of exorcism. So it's kind of understanding what it is we're talking about when we say the word demonology.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we've got today, but I just want to leave asking you one question. Someone getting into the paranormal today, what would be your number one tip for them that you've learnt over your time?
Don't waste your money buying a whole bunch of expensive equipment until you've had some personal experiences yourself. You are the best tool you could ever own. So don't spend £500 on a fancy infrared camera. Just go out there with a torch, a pad and a pen and see what happens.
That seems like pretty good advice for any kind of field, I think. So anyway, thank you very much for that, Jayne.
You're
It's
welcome.
been great talking to you, and we look forward to seeing Afterlife when it comes out. How far away is that?
We're hoping now for autumn this year. So it should have been autumn last year, but then Help My House is Haunted came along, so that threw everything out. So yes, August, September time this year.
Okay, we're really looking forward to that. Anyway, you have a great day and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you. You too. Bye.